Live from Washington, D.C., this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Welcome to Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan, along with TT Senior Government Reporter Eugene Malero. We are pleased to host this regular conversation with leading figures in the trucking, freight, and logistics industries. Today, we'll look at the nearly 18 months since President Joe Biden signed the Infrastructure and Jobs Act back in November of 2021. And we'll discuss how the law is being implemented when we talk with Congressman Rick Crawford. He's a Republican from Jonesboro, Arkansas, and he's the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure's Subcommittee, specifically Highway and Transit. And we will have our conversation with the congressman after this message. Are you a startup trying to figure out how in the world you're supposed to reach the eyes and ears of trucking decision makers, or a large corporation who wants to create a more personable brand image? Let me introduce you to the Transport Topics magazine event series. I'm Dan Ronan. I'm the voice of Transport Topics Radio, and I'll be your host. Tech and maintenance decisions can be high stakes. They require clear thinking. But getting clear-cut answers, well, it can be difficult. This series seeks to bring into focus the core ideas in the industry. For you, our potential partner, this proximity means something new, a better bond to trends and topics, a better start for relationships with interested parties, and a better way to get leads. Just like the best live learning events, Transport Topics magazine events and these sessions require their tech-focused and/or maintenance-obsessed executive learners reserve their seats. And as you've no doubt heard, the earliest registrants are treated to a lunch and a box full of swag, some of it featuring your brand. Our day begins with a general overview of the programming and a keynote interview from a big name in trucking. This is our way of setting the vibe or tone for the entire day. For you, it means getting to plant your seeds early. After a 30-second ad spot, you have a couple. Our viewer has coffee with our executive editor, Joe Howard, and his team of trend watchers. They help focus the viewer on the biggest trends of the moment. The segment is a mid-morning pick-me-up that Joe likes to frame as, after Cup of Joe, the viewers get to have their brown bag lunch, and you take center stage. This 45-minute interview segment gives me a chance to get to know one of your top executives and hear what he or she has to say about the themes of the day. Together, we'll help paint a picture of the current landscape and teach this tech and maintenance-obsessed lunch crowd something new. Some of our past partners really enjoyed this opportunity. I'm really happy with the feedback we've received from our past partners. We really appreciate their time and support. In our next segment, we hop in the truck and pull back the curtain for Road Signs with Seth and Michael. This podcast-style presentation gives the viewers a behind-the-scenes look at developing trends. These interviews and the Crossroads interview that will follow not only spotlight the important people, but also help spotlight your brand. While our editors mine the best ideas, your logo stays present next to those ideas. Finally, at the end of a long day of important conversation, we take some time just to have some fun. Your expert joins me for a quick 10-minute Q&A. This segment is part Sports Center and part thought leadership. I do the questioning, but you and your team help form the script and the response. This segment superglues your important information into the heads of the executives in a fun way to watch, and it's a fun way to produce, too. The Transport Topics magazine event is a unique virtual event that piques the interest of the tech-obsessed and maintenance-focused executives and CEOs, as well as large and small corporations in the industry. With your help, we hope to keep the Transport Topics magazine event series rolling, and we thank you for your continued support. With a background in the military, agriculture, broadcasting and marketing, rodeos and music, Congressman Crawford has one of the more interesting pre-congressional careers. first elected to the House in 2010. He is a strong supporter of transportation issues, and he joins us for the next 30 minutes. Congressman, it's good to have you with us. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act has been in place now for about 18 months. Where is it at? What type of a letter grade would you give it right now?
If I were giving it a letter grade, I'd probably give it about a D. It hasn't been a total failure, but we continue to hear some negative feedback with regard to where the money's going, how it's flowing, and how it's actually being manifested in terms of actual infrastructure investment. So, I don't want to be all negative, but it's not good at this point.
But I think you'd admit, though, that roads are being fixed. We're starting to see construction is being done. Where is your objection? Can you be more specific with some of your objections to the way is it? Is it a rural-urban split? Where is it?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I represent a largely rural district, and we're just not seeing the money flowing as we had expected. In contrast to, say, for example, Tiger grants under a previous administration. I mean, this is still a grants administration problem. So things moved a little more swiftly in previous administrations with regard to how money was flowing. And then the other issue is, quite frankly, the regulatory costs. There was not, I don't think there was an adequate consideration given to the toll that increasing interest rates would take and inflation as it applies to how this money gets down to right to the grassroots level where the construction is being done. So permitting, we've worked on several different things in IJA that we had hoped would have manifest positively, and we're not seeing that. So it may be a rural and urban divide. I mean, I don't have any largely urban areas in my district at all. And my biggest town is not even 80,000 people. And so we would like to see things speed up. And certainly, the biggest town in my district happens to be my hometown, Jonesboro, Arkansas. We would certainly like to see the process expedited so that we could get those funds where they can do some good in areas that need it. So I think a lot of it is regulatory, and maybe just that the administration may be dragging their feet. I don't know, but we would like to find out.
Eugene, go ahead.
Yeah, Congressman, thanks again for joining us. Staying in the infrastructure law, one of the programs is the, commercial drivers 18 through 20, the Drive Safe Act, this apprenticeship to get these younger truck drivers into the workforce. You recently have been expressing concern about the implementation of this program. Could you expand on those concerns?
Well, so we passed this as a part of the IJA bill, as you said, to allow 18 to 20-year-olds to drive across state lines. 49 states already have that. They already allow drivers in that age group to drive within their own state. So we put this pilot program in place, and it looks like the Biden administration has been slow walking this and this pilot program, and basically even added requirements that weren't even part of the law. They weren't in the text at all, such as requiring cameras in the cabs, that we think is an intrusion and will probably create a lack of interest in the program if you're going to have to put cameras in the cabs of the trucks. I mean, that was never suggested or in the text at all. So, we want to see it implemented properly. We have about close to 80,000 driver deficit in the trucking industry, and we feel like we can backfill that if we can get younger people in the cabs. And 49 states allow for 18 to 20-year-olds to drive within the states. So all we're saying is let's try this out, and then we can come back with the data and find out if in fact this is a public safety threat or not. And if it's not, then we expect the Secretary of Transportation to move forward with the regulations that allow those 18 to 20-year-olds to operate across state lines.
Congressman, I have a question for you, and it's a philosophical one. You've said that you wouldn't give a very high grade so far to the way the law has been implemented. Would you like to make some changes? And if you could do it all over again, would you have 18 months ago voted in favor of the law had you could have been able to make some of the changes that you're calling for now?
I'm not sure that this was such a huge price tag, and it was, I think, poorly written. I'm not sure that there's much I could have, short of an amendment in the nature of a substitute, where we could just start from zero and try again. And I'm not trying to be flippant, but this had such a focus on a climate agenda, and it seemed like the actual investment in infrastructure was secondary to that. And that's where a lot of the cost is being incurred. And so, for example, the conversation we just had about 18 to 20-year-old truckers. So we were able to get that in, but it's not been implemented in good faith. So that's a problem. One federal decision for all. So that's one thing I would like to see, so that we're not continually having to go back and get multiple agencies to say yes to a project when, we're working on a highway, for example, and we've got to get all these different agencies to sign off on that. So I'd like to see one federal decision, for example, to ports, aviation, pipeline projects. And right now it only applies to highway projects. So I introduced it for pipeline projects as an amendment to the Lower Energy Costs Act, which passed the House. But, including this broader reform in the package, we think that makes sense across the board. And that we're talking about overall infrastructure. So we tend to think about infrastructure in the context of highways more than anything else. But this needs to cut across all modes. And so we think that would have been a good provision to add. There's a few other things that we're gonna try to address in this supply chain bill that we're going to mark up in the T&I committee in the coming weeks. And so there are a number of things that we think we could have paid closer attention to, and that we're going to mark those up and include those in our supply chain bill.
Congressman, this supply chain bill, a two-part question. If you can help us with the timing of when you intend to mark this, comprehensive supply chain package, and also, is truck parking provisions going to be an aspect of that? I'm glad you brought that up. That's another thing that, I mentioned the environmental, the climate concerns in IJA. So if you ask the trucking industry what's their most pressing issue, I think everybody is going to say resoundingly truck parking. And yet there was no consideration given to truck parking, instead putting all these resources into EV charging. Well, we're not there yet. The trucking industry is not there. That's a very high cost transition that they're not willing to make yet. The market for it is not there. But, let's put all these resources into EV charging when what we really need is truck parking. That was a huge swing and a miss. And if we're talking about going back and correcting something, so I'm glad you reminded me of that. Truck parking would have been front and center on this, because that is a huge issue with regard to supply chain continuity and compliance and all those things that have, continue to be, look, truckers are trying to follow the rules, and then you tell them you've got to rest a certain amount of time, but you don't give them any space to where they can. And so that creates safety problems. And it creates other issues, where you've got on-ramps and off-ramps full of trucks because they don't have anywhere else to park. But boy, they can go charge up an EV. The fact is, there's just not enough of them to make a difference. So why did we put all that emphasis on EVs when what we should have done was focus on the pressing need of parking for trucks? So yeah, that's one I would go back and redo. I don't know that would have been enough for me and my colleagues to have said yes to that huge $1.2 trillion bill, but it certainly would have shown that maybe they weren't just strictly trying to engage on a climate agenda. And so that was a major mistake, in my opinion.
Congressman, go ahead, Eugene.
And in regards to the timing of a supply chain package before the T&I committee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going to start working on that as early as this week. And then that'll continue on, and we should have some, a comprehensive package sooner rather than later. I suspect that, we're gonna have a markup hearing, I think, later this week, and there'll be a few others, but that will basically help comprise the greater supply chain bill.
Okay.
Congressman, you mentioned the issue of truck parking, and there's an estimated 300,000 or 400,000 spots in the country, maybe one spot for every 10 drivers. Some are proposing that current land that is being used by states for their rest areas and the like, that they be allowed to expand those. But there's a provision in the law that talks about how state rest stops can no longer compete with commercial rest stops, whether they be truck stops or gas stations. Should that law be changed to allow the state governments to create more parking spots, but also be allowed to have facilities there, maybe more food, more places to use the bathroom, showers that compete with the traditional truck stops that are out there?
Well, I don't necessarily think we ought to put governments in competition with private sector. So if you were going to open up, the idea that we're going to expand state truck stops or rest stops,
rest areas.
Rest areas. I would not necessarily say no to a commercial collaboration in that space where you could allow for those companies that provide that service now to be able to expand what they're doing to include those spaces. But to say that now we're going to stand up a government competition model to compete with folks who've invested billions of dollars in providing services to the trucking industry. And keep in mind, not only they provide those services to the trucking industry, but just about any traveler on interstate highways avails themselves of those services because I think they do a fantastic job. They're generally speaking, they're in the right locations to be able to address the need of not just trucking industry, but travelers. And so if you're going to do that, then I think you have to consider opening that up and allowing for private companies to bid for that space so they can, so we're not pitting governments against the private sector.
So if a pilot, Flying J or Wawa was able to work something out with a state government in Missouri or your state of Arkansas, that you're saying that would be something you'd be open to considering?
I would think that would be something I would be open to allowing the states to explore. But to say that, we're just having a conversation, spitballing here. Generally speaking, I don't favor the idea of states engaging in a competitive practice with the private sector as it applies to the topic that we're discussing. But if the states said, look, we think we can provide more parking space, but we're going to allow a Love's or a Pilot, Flying J or whoever to come in and bid for that space. Now we're talking about a competitive marketplace, and that's something certainly would be more open to.
Eugene?
The Federal Highway Administration updated this guidance memo from 2021. They did so earlier this year. The leadership at your committee was really on the forefront calling for a complete cancellation, rescinding this memo. Could you, talk about your reaction to the agency's update of this memo, and also proponents of the original memo continue to advocate and really continue to tout and celebrate what they said was the original essence of the memo, which was a fix it first concept?
Yeah, so look, fixing it first may not be indicated when you have a volume of traffic that really requires additional capacity. And so, for example, if you can't achieve a good state of repair, then you can't qualify for additional capacity. Well, you may never get additional capacity. That may be the fundamental problem, is that you can never achieve a good state of repair because of the volume of traffic. And I'll give you an example in my home state of Arkansas. That stretch of I-40 between Little Rock and Memphis has never not been under construction in my lifetime, under repair, because it may be one of the most heavily trafficked east-west arteries in the country. And how are we ever going to address that long term if we don't entertain the idea of expanding capacity? And so I understand that we want states to take care of what they have. I get it. But we see, tremendous growth in certain areas of the country that require additional capacity just to meet the volume of traffic. And so the idea that you've got to go fix it first before adding additional capacity means that you may never pass that test. You may never get to add additional capacity because it'd be almost impossible to fix it to the standards that are prescribed, when what you really need in order to fix it is more capacity. Okay. So I'm glad that I think they missed the boat on that initially. I'm glad that, and of course we did sign that or send that letter, asking them to reconsider, and I think that was the appropriate course.
Congressman, if you don't mind, I'd like to shift gears a little bit to a topic that Eugene and I talked with the Secretary about just a couple of days ago. We are approaching 43,000 highway deaths every year in this country. The number has been going up over the last 3 or 4 years. People have been speeding. We've been seeing people driving in a reckless manner across the country. And some of it is attributable also to highways and roads that are poorly constructed. Your thoughts on this particular epidemic of highway problems that we've got, and what can we do? Is there anything that can be done from a federal level to bring this number down, or does it go back more to personal responsibility, lack of texting while driving? Don't drive a car if you're under the influence of any sort of a substance. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you really touched on one of the most important parts, and that's personal responsibility. And then, there are a lot of distractions. Cars are made today to, accommodate every desire we have. I mean, you get in the car and it syncs up with your phone, and now you can see your phone screen. And, yes, there are some safeties incorporated in many cases to prevent you from texting while you're driving. But, those kinds of distractions are problematic, I think, and pervasive. The other thing is just, quite frankly, a respect for others, respect for law enforcement, personal responsibility, those kinds of things. And I think not just the evidence of really kind of a decline in social discourse is being made manifest in an increase in traffic deaths, because we have less consideration for our fellow human beings. And that doesn't just mean that stops on, for example, say a bus or a train. That carries over into every mode of transit that we use, and mode of transportation that people feel like they're empowered when they're behind the wheel, and maybe they're less likely to be as courteous as they should be. We see an increase in road rage that's taken place, and you talked about highway deaths, but we're also seeing incidents of road rage in where you have congestion in around cities and traffic. And I think it really just kind of points to a decline in social discourse, and who knows what the contributing factors are. I have a few ideas, but we're seeing that not only on roads and highways, but we're seeing it in the marketplace. You go to the mall, go to the grocery store, and see the way people treat each other, and that's not good. And I think we need to start thinking about that just as a society, about how we interact with people, have greater respect for our fellow man, and greater respect for law enforcement.
It just seems like, Congressman, that it's easier to, if you get angrier with somebody on the road, it's easier to give them a nasty gesture or cut them off than to give them the break and maybe say, well, maybe they didn't see me, or give them the benefit of the doubt.
Sure. No, I agree with that. And sometimes you have to be the bigger person and yield, and you might be mad about it, but at least you're not jeopardizing your life or someone else's. And so, I would just encourage people to, figuratively take the high road and don't get drawn into, road rage incidents that can lead to fatalities, and just be a little more careful, a little more cautious, a little more situational awareness out there.
Eugene?
And then, Congressman, staying on the safety issue, what would you like to see the Department of Transportation, at the federal level, do more to address, the highway fatalities?
Well, I think a lot of this is when you are traveling from state to state, for example, you notice maybe some differences in the way certain states address things like distracted driving. And, you see a lot of billboards and road signs out there that remind people, don't text and drive. And so I think states are probably taking the lead in trying to police that, and probably a little more aggressively. When you see someone, they might not necessarily be driving aggressively, but maybe they're being absent-minded because they're concerned about text conversation or trying to send an email, and they get distracted, and then that becomes it may present as aggressive driving or something like that. But bottom line is, I think states can and should and are addressing that. Some states maybe more aggressively than others, but I think that's probably the appropriate course.
Congressman, your home state of Arkansas has a large number of trucking companies that are there, and there has been a little bit of concern that we are entering a freight recession, maybe a recession itself for the overall economy itself. Talk about that, if you would, where we're at with regards to the economy, and what do you hear when you talk to those leaders in the trucking industry in your home city and your home district? What are you hearing from those folks?
Well, broadly speaking, I think we can agree that the trucking industry may be as good a barometer of the economy as anything that we have out there, and that is the movement of goods across the country. And I mean, if you go to the store and buy something, a truck brought it. I mean, there's multi-mode transportation that contribute to the movement of goods, but we rely heavily on trucking as that last mile delivery, and pretty much they handle everything. And so they are as accurate a barometer of economic activity as I think you could find. And I think one of the things that we have to be a little more attuned to is exactly what are trucking companies saying? What are we hearing from them? One of them is the driver shortage. I mean, that's a huge issue. The other is we're seeing an increase in age, not unlike the increasing age of farmers. These are important, critical jobs that we're not really successfully backfilling. And so, you think about what we're hearing from a lot of trucking companies. It's not because they're not being paid well. It's not because the opportunities aren't there, but for whatever reason, the trucking industry is struggling with trying to bend that curve on the aging operator population, and bringing in young people, which gets back to the 18 to 20-year-old drivers pilot program. And I think that would be an appropriate addition to help bend that curve down to a more manageable figure, a more manageable number. But I think those are the overriding concerns. We talked about truck parking, and so we're trying to make sure that trucking companies and their drivers are being compliant. Independent owner operators are saying the same thing. They don't have the truck parking space that they need. So those are some issues that can be addressed at the federal level. Those are the kinds of things that I think we need to listen to. And if we're hearing from trucking companies that there are supply chain glitches, we better listen to them, because they are integral to the supply chain. And so I think we can learn a lot from the things that they have to share with us. And, just as some of the things that I've outlined here, there are some things we can do at the federal level to take action to hopefully correct that course.
Eugene?
Congressman, from your vantage point as chairman of the Highways and Transit Subcommittee, how is Secretary Buttigieg doing so far?
I want to say that I think Secretary Pete is maybe as nice a guy as you could ask for, in terms of, cabinet members, but he doesn't necessarily mean he's getting the job done. I like him personally. I've had several conversations with him. I have to give him personally high marks for his personal response to the I-40 bridge shutdown. He did address that quickly. And so credit where credit's due, but generally speaking, I think he can do better when we're talking about the administration of IJA and making sure that not only are we seeing those funds going to major metropolitan areas, but recognizing that rural communities who are really dependent on infrastructure investment, that they're not being left out. And so, I want to encourage him to broaden the scope a little bit, recognize that rural America is just as dependent on a vibrant infrastructure as urban America, and maybe more so. And so I would just encourage him on that front. And like I said, I find him to be one of the most personable members of the cabinet, a very likable individual. And so, that said, I would like to help him make the improvements that are necessary for there to be a higher degree of success with regard to IG.
Congressman, a philosophical question that I've been wanting to ask you. There are some members of your caucus who believe that the way to fix our transit problems and our highway problems is to decouple from the federal government, give it back to the states, let the states run it. With a 75-year tradition of doing this, going back to the Eisenhower administration, is that realistic?
Well, I think the answer is in there somewhere. And I think a lot of it has to do with allowing states to have more flexibility in how they manage infrastructure investment in their state, because every state is different and different in economic ways, different in cultural ways, and different in topography and geography. And honestly, the soil composition, the soil profile in Arkansas is different in East Arkansas than it is in Western Arkansas. I mean, so it's as simple as recognizing that you can't build a highway the same way in New Mexico as you might do in Michigan. And so allowing the states to have a higher degree of flexibility and not really starting from the default position that everybody that's building a highway is trying to destroy the environment. That's not true. And so I think we need to recognize that. And then how do we empower states to help them supplement the investment? For example, in Arkansas, we implemented a half-cent sales tax on a gallon of gas. We did that several years ago, and we did it very, very openly. The voters voted for it, and it worked so well. And our DOT and our Highway Commission did such a good job communicating exactly where that revenue was going to go and how it was going to be invested, that the voters re-upped it the second time around. And we've continued that because they were very transparent in that process. And so if we could get states to do more of that, and the Fed recognizing that pull yourself up by your bootstraps approach, the skin in the game approach, I think should be recognized, and it should be, put you in a higher priority when it comes time for federal money to flow into that state. And there are other states besides, I say Arkansas because I'm giving you the personal example of having seen that happen, but there are other states that are doing similar things. And for those states who are investing in themselves, then I think it's reasonable to think they probably ought to be in better standing.
Eugene, we've got about 3 minutes left, so you get the final question of the congressman as we conclude our conversation.
Congressman, if we could return back to electric vehicles. So electric trucks, as you know, several stakeholders have shared your sentiment that it's just the charging stations are not ready for prime time. A two-part question. When do you anticipate the infrastructure nationwide to be ready to accommodate electric commercial vehicles, electric trucks? And also, in going back to the near term, what would you recommend that regulators do with the whole question of electric charging stations?
I think we need to be a little more realistic in how we can get to a point at which we can actually realize EVs at scale. I mean, right now, our power grid couldn't meet the demand of EVs if everybody went out and bought an EV, and if every trucking company went out and upgraded their fleet to EVs. We simply are not prepared to address the demand. And so if you're on the one hand, you're going to say we want to transition to electric vehicles, and then in the same sentence talk about how you don't want to use fossil fuels for electric generation, you don't want to use nuclear for electric generation, so we're going to go only to power and wind, our solar and wind power. We couldn't even meet our current baseload demands with solar and wind. There's no way we can meet those demands when we start adding widespread use of EVs, and particularly as it applies to the commercial application of EVs in the trucking industry. So we're not anywhere close. It's unrealistic. We're not anywhere close to thinking that's a workable plan. And so I think we have to rethink the timeline here. And also the cost, quite frankly. EVs are expensive. And, that's true for, for personal use. And it's just as true in commercial vehicles. And we're not quite ready yet. The market's not quite ready yet. I'm all in for all of this. I'm not against EVs at all. But I think that we can't facilitate the introduction of EVs and at the same time be downgrading our electric grid and expect that we're not going to have major problems in the short term if we continue on that course.
Congressman, thanks for chatting with us. It's been an interesting 30 minutes, and I think that our viewers have been enlightened on a lot of your positions, and we appreciate it. Hope we get a chance to do this again.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for your time.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
We thank our guest, Congressman Rick Crawford of Arkansas, for being so generous with his time to answer our questions. This webcast will be available for viewing on demand. Go to ttnews.com for more information, how you can watch the full interview with Congressman Rick Crawford. On behalf of my TT colleague, Eugene Malero, I'm Dan Ronan with ttnews.com. We thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.